Good evening, everyone. Welcome to yet another Saving Elephants live stream with yet another star-studded group of panelists. We hope to be joined soon by John Giocaris, but it is my honor to welcome two newbies to these panels. Blake Fisher from the Homeless Conservative podcast. Good to have you this evening, Blake.
Thanks for having me.
And Christopher Chesney, my friend going way back, many years back in Republican circles here around the greater Tulsa area. In fact, we were chatting as the video went live here. All three of us hail from Oklahoma. Slightly different parts. Christopher, you're currently in the D.C. area.
Which I have to show I'm rocking the Sooners gear still today because it worked well for us yesterday. So first good game of the season.
I actually have my OU steel mug awesome. That I've been utilizing for a good long while. I went there for my graduate school.
Yeah.
Although I'm not the biggest football fan from there. Some of my old friends who might be streaming might testify, but I rock it around the office. So
yeah,
I can't deny my roots at this point. So
I like it.
Had I known it would be the three of us, I might have done a more Oklahoma-centric local politics conversation. Maybe we could save that for a later date. But we're here tonight to talk about, honestly, what a lot of political pundits have been talking about, right? Donald Trump has been reelected. The Republicans are set to take over the Senate, the House. What is this going to look like? I mean, we've been here before. We've seen 4 years of Donald Trump already. I know some of his... I think one of the things I find very interesting about some of his biggest never-Trumper critics and his biggest MAGA fans is that they both seem to agree Trump 2.0 is going to be different because he's going to be unfettered from some of the things that held him back in the past. Whether that's a very good thing or a very bad thing, usually is left to the interpretation of the person, what they think of Trump in the first place. But that's the central conversation we'll be having this evening. Thank you for everyone watching live stream. As a reminder, you can post questions, comments as we're having this discussion. Anything that is appropriately tasteful, I will be more than happy to share with the panelist. And if you have a question you want to toss our way, I'd be happy to share that also. Again, _ appropriately tasteful. But with that, you gentlemen, I know, have no problems talking. So let's just dive right in. At a high level, and we can talk about individual policy parts individually as we want to go along. But at a high level, are you mostly bullish or bearish about Trump 2.0?
Blake, go ahead.
Okay. As with most things that are complicated, it's a mix of both. I would say I'm definitely more bearish than bullish just because I think most of those things that people expect for Trump to be different in this term are, I think, things that don't help him. I think that they're not things that help him succeed. I think most of the reason that he has, most of the successes he had in his first term, I think were because he hired people that were smarter, more. I'm not trying to do this to like degrade his intelligence or something like that. I'm just saying it in a way that like he hired people that cared about those things that he was working on, and generally, if he got out of the way of those people, they did a good job. It seems like he's learned the lesson to not do that this time because now he hates all of those people. I mean, really, the people that he owes his first administration's successes to, in my opinion, are Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and people like Rex Tillerson and Bill Barr and like these people that he hired that end up leaving or being fired because they eventually said no to him on something that they had a line in the sand for. And I think they were right. And I think that if they would have allowed, or, if they would have said yes to those things, I think it would have been detrimental to Trump. So sometimes Trump can't get out of his own way. I think it's pretty obvious from the cabinet picks so far. He's picking people that are more interested in being loyal to him and not telling him no. I think some of them are good picks. It's just like, what version of Marco Rubio are we going to get? Are we going to get a version that says, hey, I've been on the Senate Intelligence Committee for a long time. I know more about this than you do, even though you were president for 4 years. And this is the play here. Or is he going to roll over? I think that's what it really depends on at this point is who he has in those positions. I think some picks have been good. Like I said, Marco Rubio, I think is a good pick. I think some of his other picks are good. And then there's people like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and Gates obviously already dropped out, but picks like that where it sounds like his chief of staff wasn't even aware that he was picking Gates because he basically last minute just got told to do it and did it. I think the more kind of chaos he does like that, the worse it is for his administration. And I don't see him being reined in by this group of people. So that's why I tend to lean bearish. I mean, bullish, whatever, whichever way. Bearish is the right,
we
the
should
bad
probably
way.
clarify for the sake
Yeah.
of the audience, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Bearish is more the we're expecting bad things to happen, bullish good
Right.
things to happen.
I get them confused all the time. I did have to look it up the other day. I was like, wait, make sure I've got this right before I go all in on something.
Christopher, what say you?
I am probably about at this level of inverse with him, and until a few days ago, I probably would have been at about a 90-10 bull. I'm probably around 75 to 70% bull now, but that's for a particular professional obligation with somebody, and I'll go into that a little bit later without disclosing.
Just tell me if you could reveal. I'm assuming that's not because Gates dropped out of the running that made you less bullish.
It was not him. No.
Okay. No. I figured as much. I just want to make sure.
But I would say there are aspects of some of the stuff with constraint from the last administration that I could understand in certain small ways, but looking at specifics of where he's wanting to channel, where and how he's wanting to channel some of his populist anger, or however you want to view it, I think some of it could be potentially refreshing, most notably aspects of Schedule F reform and trying to go after aspects of the top tier of the civil service, which have been the most detrimental for being able to achieve long-lasting conservative reforms. In a lot of ways, you can argue going back to Eisenhower, but especially the last 20, 30, and going back to Reagan 40, 45 years. And I think that at base, even with some people that are not as doctrinaire conservative as they would have been, as I would have probably either personally gone with or otherwise would have liked, RFK most notably, I am actually for a lot of the reforms on this, and having disruptors in the chain of command at this point, I think some amount of blowing up aspects of that part of the administrative state, and some I could even see the argument for deep state, especially in some of the national security circles. I am for. Part of the reason I'm at that point, especially on foreign policy, is having seen up close with friends and family who have gone through a lot of the worst aspects of the managerialism that has overseen the Department of Defense the last 20, 30 years, up close and personal, has turned me away from me having been a neocon in past up till about a decade ago. And I'm all for blowing up aspects of that, and having seen some of the aspects of the national security state that have been erected the last quarter century, I'm all for having people like Tulsi Gabbard come in to help, in a lot of ways, blow it up. I don't have a problem with that. So I am mostly optimistic about a lot of that approach, even from very non-traditional circles, in most of his picks thus far. And I would also say that some of the ones that may not get through if he has backups, like Gates being replaced by Bondi, it is kind of one of those things where the bad pick kind of makes the person that would have otherwise been acceptable come in and be able to be more acceptable as the alternative. So I'm for that general course of action here, and I think it can work out. Again, with one glaring exception, which we could get into shortly, which I'm sure Josh is pretty aware of, where I'm thinking he knows that one. And we'll talk about that one in a minute. But that's where I'm at. I'm going to be contrarian on that. There's some aspects where him being unfettered could be bad, but I'm mostly in the inverse of where Blake is at this point.
So, and I want to ask you about this, Christopher, because you and I have talked about this recently, about these picks, because I had proffered to you a theory that in Trump 1.0, he had begun to stack his cabinet with individuals that had to spend a lot of their professional and political careers railing against the very departments they were appointed to. Betsy DeVos, Department of Education, and why can I never remember? It's ironic. I forget the name of the governor of Texas, Rick Perry. There we go. Rick Perry, the Department of Energy, the department he couldn't name in the debates. It was ironic I was forgetting his name. And as you well know, Christopher, my least favorite Oklahoma politician, Scott Pruitt, for the Attorney General. I'm sorry, not for Attorney General, for the Department of the Environmental Protection Agency. There we go. Anyhow, the point being, these were individuals that had made a name for themselves in a lot of ways of wanting to dismantle what they saw as the mistakes within these departments. And they were in a lot of ways, Department of Education, Department of Energy. I've told you personally, I don't want to get rid of the EPA, but I do not mind scaling it back. Department of Education, I don't know why we need one. I think it does far more harm than good. And if there's a well thought through plan as to how do we unwind these things, it looked to me like at the beginning of the first Trump administration, maybe that's how you start the plan. And maybe it wasn't Trump himself, but maybe somebody in the selection committee was saying, hey, let's put these people in positions of authority so that we can begin to institute this plan. The reason I'm saying it that way is because, and I'm thinking here on Twitter, a year after Donald Trump's first year in office, somebody tweeted, what was your favorite memory from last year's infrastructure week? Obviously referring to the Proud Boys moment. And it was kind of this whole notion of, yeah, Trump points to some pretty bad problems in our politics, and he has the ability to disrupt things, and he puts people in positions to disrupt things. But if there isn't an actual follow through or plan, it doesn't seem to accomplish anything other than possible disruptions. And so I guess I'm curious, and I'll open this to both of you gentlemen, but I guess I'm curious here because it would appear to me that Trump 2.0 is almost hitting the gas on that very method of disruption. I agree with you, Christopher. A lot of the things we would want to see reforms, and you and I probably have a lot of agreements. My concern is that I don't see that these individuals are capable of delivering on these kind of promises.
Some of them I think you might be very well right on, but others, like I mentioned, Pam Bondi, who has been an attorney general in Florida, was there for 8 years. She clearly has a pedigree in a lot of ways better than Gates did to be able to tackle a lot of this, given how she took on the admittedly, she had a decade of Republican AGs there to set the course for her there, but she has a knowledge of how a well-run Department of Justice can be done in one of the biggest states in the country. I think she could translate that pretty well with whatever reforms are going to happen in the Department of Justice with politicization. And I do think there has been more than a little bit, in fact, quite a lot. And she could definitely steer it to the point where there might be some mass resignations or firings that come even before you get to Schedule F. And I think that that's just one example where I think it can also turn out to the good. I would also say that Vince McMahon's wife, Linda, who ran Small Business Administration in the first term, most everybody that's on the right wing thinks that she's slightly unconventional, but they have no reason to think that she would go down the wrong path, and she would continue a very similar path to what Betsy DeVos did, if not even being more aggressive in that same department. Rubio, yes, there's different iterations of what we could expect from Rubio, but I expect, given his background and where he's coming from, he might have a particular axe to go after aspects of the State Department that I have long had issue with. Being able to take on Foggy Bottom, and being able to weed out what Deadwood are there. Those are three prime examples, I think, that there, be it AFPI's playbook or Heritage's with Project 2025, they weren't that different. And I think that a lot of that will probably get play. And admittedly, those are three of the best ones that I could think of with where it's going to go. And I think Ascent being at Treasury, he's another example of somebody I think will go well. at least by and large, and people that are otherwise skeptical from a guy who had a Soros background, they've been won over by him, and I'm willing to at least see how that goes and give that a chance. I think Russ Vought's also going to be at another place in the administration too, and he's a carryover too. So I'm not that worried yet at this point, at least in those positions, with where things are going. So there is potential for things to blow up, obviously, in a bad way, but those are just a few positions I think could be very, very well, or work out very, very well. And carrying a Schedule F reform combined with various other approaches. So
I think my problem with it though is that you can put anyone in there to be a wrecking ball and fire a bunch of people or get rid of departments or whatever they want to do, because that's really how that's the talk going into it. It's a lot of bluster of we're going to fire all these people and we're going to and that's fine. I think that there needs to be some of that. There's also though the realistic situation where there's probably some agencies that actually need to hire some people. There's probably some that the reason they're not efficient or the reason they're not working. I mean, we lost over $400 billion in fraud and waste of the COVID funds, which is 10% of it. That's probably because we need some more people helping look for the fraud, So there's some situations where my concern is that when you put someone in that has no idea, for example, Hegseth has zero managerial experience whatsoever. And maybe sometimes what we need is someone that can go in there and shake stuff up. I just don't believe you can take a wrecking ball to something like the Pentagon that's not ever passed a freaking audit. And then without someone that actually knows what the solution is. And I'm also worried that none of this matters if it doesn't get congressional stuff written into law about how these agencies work. Because if Republicans want to come in here and just come with a wrecking ball and fire a bunch of people, if Trump screws this up, which the pattern certainly is we are tired of this party and we're going to vote in this party, and no one really is voting for someone. They're voting against the party that's in power over and over again. It happens in 2016, 2020, 2024. I think it's realistic that it'll happen in the House and the Senate in 2026, and then potentially the White House in 2028. If you don't do it in a permanent way, it's not a permanent conservative change. It's not actually a change in how the government's going to function going forward. It's just a temporary, every 4 years, we're doing this swing back and forth. And I think that's a bad way for the government to work. I don't think that helps businesses run when they go, well, we at least know how it's going to be for 4 years, but then it's a total roll of the dice depends on who gets elected the next time. I think we have to get Congress involved in this stuff. So far, it does not look like Trump wants Congress to be involved in most of these things. If you notice, the Vivek and Elon Musk Doge thing, they're explicitly saying we're going to try to do all this via executive order. That just doesn't work for very long. It might work for a couple of years, but it might not even work for. So, I think you've got to take advantage of right now having the House and the Senate and actually get stuff changed in law. If you want immigration reform, it's not executive orders. I think it needs to be Congress needs to pass something. I think same thing with a lot of these agencies. I think Congress needs to take back their power that they've abdicated to these agencies. I think that's the biggest problem we have in the country. There's some promising signs in that the Senate already kind of said, hey, we're not playing ball with this. You trying to hire Matt Gaetz without talking to us about it. We're not going to play that game. So I think that there's some hope that the Senate will actually be jealous of the power that they have not given to the executive branch, and maybe and like I said, I think all of this helps Trump. I don't think any of this actually thwarts him getting stuff done. I think he would be smart to listen to the people in the Senate that have been there for a long time that say, hey, this would be a win. Don't pick a stupid fight that you don't need to do right now. So I hope that he listens some to them. I'm just not terribly optimistic that that's going to happen. And I just worry that if you take a wrecking ball to, we haven't talked about Robert Kennedy Jr. yet, but that's a good example of just that is a quarter of the money we spend goes through HHS, Health and Human Services. If he takes a wrecking ball to it and people aren't getting their Medicare payments or whatever like that, you know what I mean? People are going to be pissed off. And keep in mind, Biden, it only took him barely 7 months to piss off the country and never recover. It was basically we didn't know it was inflationary, but any of us that had any kind of economic common sense knew that the spending he was doing for COVID relief in March of 2021, when the economy was already roaring back, was going to be inflationary. We all guessed that going forward. And then the Afghanistan withdrawal, he never recovered. His favorability tanked, and it never recovered after that. And essentially, people were pissed at him from then on. It doesn't take very long to do something that potentially pisses you off. And especially if you're a lame duck, it's even less likely that Congress is going to work with you. So that's my concern, is that I think he really needs to be smart about what he does in these first 6 months that he's in power, and he has the House and he has the Senate. I think if he can do that, he can get some wins that get the people behind him, and potentially have the people behind the Senate, where, getting immigration reform, for example, like actually passing a law, not just signing executive orders, will require some Democrats in the Senate. Well, they had that pressure of Joe Biden telling them they needed to pass that last bill that Trump tanked. They won't have that motivation this time. The only motivation that's going to get Democrats to vote for like an immigration reform bill, especially one that was as beneficial to Republicans as that one that Trump tanked, is that to have pressure from people that are going to reelect them in 2026 or 2028. That's where that pressure is going to have to come from. I think it was pretty clear that the election in November said that people wanted the border to be secure, they wanted immigration reform, and they wanted the economy to be better. They don't like inflation. I think those are the only mandates Trump has. I think to pretend he has mandates to do anything else, including cleaning up the federal bureaucracy, I think he should slow play that a little bit more than he's talking about, because that, to me, that was not the mandate that people were demanding when they voted in November.
Yeah. What mandates the president does or doesn't have is, of course, something we probably could and should talk about in this conversation. But Blake, you said something that that always triggers the negative way of putting it. It always piques my interest, which is it is true that it doesn't seem the Trump administration wants Congress involved. I think the bigger problem is that Congress doesn't seem to want Congress involved.
Right.
And I don't, and you're correct. It could be that the Senate has shown some signs of jealously guarding its power, but gosh, we need a lot more than that.
We need to, yeah, we do.
Robust Congress to reassert itself, to get out of this ridiculous game that we see where we essentially rule through executive fiat, and then the next guy gets in and undoes it all. I would say that of all the things Trump, maybe that word mandate is the right one to use. Of all the things it would appear Trump has the most oomph behind him would be immigration, in my view. And whether or not they could get that over the finish line, that is one of the, I guess I haven't said one way or another. I'm mostly bearish on Donald Trump 2.0. Probably no surprise to either of you gentlemen or to anyone that listens to Saving Elephants. But that is one area where I am genuinely hopeful, and I don't think my hope is terribly misplaced here, that we could see some positive development. But if it's going to be lasting, it's going to take Congress. It can't just be the executive branch. If it's going to have any sort of meaningful reform, we had Donald Trump for 4 years. And after Donald Trump, we had the largest immigration crisis of modern history. The only way to avoid that again is to enshrine these things, to get Congress to work alongside you. And I guess that's, and Christopher, maybe going back more to your point, I agree there are some, it's a mixed bag. There are some individuals who are capable. Marco Rubio, for instance, under a President Bush or McCain or Romney, I think is a very different potential Marco Rubio than under Donald Trump. And I think sometimes my concern is not so much the capacity of the individuals within these departments. It's the head of the ticket, right? It's the individual. If that individual is not willing to allow people to institute, we've torn things apart, but now let's start to bring in some sensible reforms, he can damage the entire process. And I'm kind of concerned that it does not matter how good of a team he has or has not assembled if he's unwilling to listen to the team and he spends more time tweeting nonsense that blows things up.
So I would, obviously Congress has to be involved, especially with stuff with the financial side and aspects of tax reform that were due to come up. So that is one that's obviously going to be having to come up. And I imagine that will be, especially depending on stuff with CR over the next few weeks, once we get back from Thanksgiving, will be set up for him. And I imagine it's going to probably all be rolled into one over the course of that. So I know that's going to be one thing he's going to be dealing with. I also imagine that, yes, immigration is going to be dealt with. And admittedly, there is a lot of law in the books that he can take advantage of already that he admittedly did do some already last term, not as effectively, but now that he's got the ropes on this, I do believe that Holman and some of the people that he will have in charge of those agencies will be overly effective. Some would say overly effective. I would say exactly what I would want to deal with some of that. And I imagine that they have their sea legs on that issue in particular with addressing it. And I think that they will proceed quite quickly on that. And they don't even need as much congressional lawmaking to enforce what the laws are on the books. That had been a refrain over the course of the last several years, that we don't need more law, just enforce what law we do have.
Right. Yeah.
So I imagine that's going to be something that they aren't going to need that much action on, except maybe financing the rest of the border wall. A lot of the stuff is already there on the border and was left to rust over the last 4 years anyway. It's just a matter of literally picking up where we left off on it. So
yeah,
admittedly, there's a lot of stuff that he could already be doing, and I imagine they will be much more, even with Democrats still having filibuster, being willing and able to accommodate on that, especially given the fact that he got 31 states instead of just 30. Plus, so that could get him to that, because they had the fear of God lit into them because of the margins he put up, especially in Arizona, to be able to address this issue. So I imagine there's going to be at least some potential accommodation on this, especially from a lot of the constituents, and especially from the Hispanic community, which I believe gave him into the low to mid 40s, and he got at least 50% amongst Hispanic men, and he got fairly substantial majorities along almost every
he improved in every
area along the border. So
the only demographic he did not do better on in 2024 was white people. That is actually the only demographic that he lost, like as far as he gained.
And that was like a marginal thing of like 1 or 2%.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't that much. But I mean, the point is, like, that's pretty telling. I think the other thing, though, that I think is very, like, the line he needs to ride there, though, that's really careful. The way Republicans are talking right now is that they just absolutely hammer Democrats across the board on this stuff. It's not really true. Trump won some states that Democrats won the Senate in. So they picked up more seats than I thought they would. I thought we'd have 52, ended up being 53. But I mean, that has not happened in my lifetime, I don't think, other than in Maine, where the president won the top of the ticket and the other party won. But Maine's kind of weird because it's Susan Collins, who's a Republican in a more blue state. But there were 4 states that went Democratic senators, Trump at the top of the ticket. To me, that clearly says people aren't all in on Republicans. They were just absolutely tired of Biden and Harris. To me, that was a rejection of Biden and Harris, not a full embrace of Trump or really anything other than we don't like inflation. And it's really hurt us. It's hurt my savings. It's hurt my spending that I do right now. The money I take home is not worth as much as it was 4 years ago. I think that's what most people are voting on, because unlike something like unemployment or any other of the issues, abortion, pick any issue that we talked about, inflation is the only one that affected absolutely every single person in the country. So every single voter, their wallet or their savings or something, or their business, something was in fact affected by inflation over the last several years. And so and you look at, like, especially, I mean, exit polls, grain of salt, sort of disclaimer said, because exit polls aren't not super accurate, especially right now. They've got to analyze them a little bit more and stuff. But, it showed Latino people, specifically all those minorities, it was inflation that was the problem. They did, I mean, further down the list were immigration and border control. Honestly, Trump owes maybe his entire win to governors like Abbott sending loads of migrants to Chicago and New York and stuff, and actually making this not a red state, blue state thing, but there were Democrats in Mayor Adams in New York City was saying, like, New York will never be the same. We cannot deal with this. This is a crisis. And I think that really woke people up to that issue that used to just be something we saw in the news happening in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico. So I think he's got to tread carefully, because I think that if you seal up the border and stop the blood flow, that's step one, obviously, which he can do with executive orders. And Biden already sort of did in the last 6 months, proving that it could be executive orders. But I think that he can walk a dangerous rope to, like, if he starts really trying to use the military to deport 11 million people or whatever, I don't think that the voters are going to go along with that. Especially, I don't think most people understand the economic consequences of that and stuff. Now, if he wants to go over people that have been convicted of crimes, or people that we figure out were gang members, I mean, that to me is the biggest, just the craziest thing of the last 4 years. It's like, I mean, the story this week was Alvin Bragg's one of his assistants got mugged by a Venezuelan gang member that's here on asylum. Well, I mean, that story writes itself for conservative media. But you can go too far the other way if you start, if the cameras are showing families getting separated, kids that were born here and their parents getting deported, I don't think you're going to have the backing of the voters. I think that you can lose people really quick. And I don't see that Trump's going at this with surgical tools. It seems like he wants to go after it with a sledgehammer. And I would, if I could be in his ear, I'd say, hey, I'm with you. I think that this system needs to be fixed, but you better do it in a way that you don't lose voters, or you're going to lose Congress in a couple years. And I know he doesn't care about the Republican Party, but Republicans are going to lose for a long time too. Like I said, most people are just voting against a party right now. And for Republicans to think that they can just try to do everything they want to do right now and not have a backlash, I think is foolish as when Democrats did it, and Republicans before that, and Democrats before that, and Republicans before that. We've been in kind of this pattern of, it's almost like trying to do everything invites the backlash that happens in a couple of years. And like I said, with Biden, it only took 7 months for the public to turn on him.
So you mentioned the Republican Party, because I think we hear this very often, that this is now Trump's party. And I think it's probably undeniable that what 2024 could demonstrate was that 2016 was not a fluke, or to whatever degree 2016 was a fluke, it can no longer be called that. That he has staying power, and not just Trump per se, but his sort of brand or his approach. Even though one could probably argue there really is no such thing as a Donald Trump mini-me, or well, maybe in smaller bits, maybe a Matt Gaetz, maybe you got Vivek Ramaswamy tried it and he tanked horribly. Marco Rubio tried in a single debate and he tanked horribly. It's Donald Trump, but it's his party, right? He has shifted, he's such an interesting character, because then you see individuals such as a nationalist populist try to reverse engineer an entire ideological structure around it, saying, well, now it's a nationalist populist party. Maybe it is. Maybe it is more of a workers' party than what it was prior to Trump. But then Trump will say something that throws that completely out of whack. So I'm curious. Ronald Reagan forever changed the Republican Party, at least for that era. I mean, to a certain degree, you could say Barry Goldwater forever changed the Republican Party, even though you had this weird interim of Richard Nixon in between there. Had it not been for Goldwater, we probably would have never had a Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. Is the Republican Party for our lifetime forever changed? And if so, what does that mean? Does this mean, Blake, you're the homeless conservative? And I want to get both you and Christopher's take on it, but does this mean that those of us who aspire to conservatism are going to be able to look to the Republican Party for some policy wins occasionally, and we're more at home with them than maybe we are the Democrats on issues, but there's no longer a conservative party for us to best hope at?
Yeah, there's kind of two weird things that go along with that. First of all, I would say that I would bet any other Republican that was on the stage for the Republican primary, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie, Doug Burnham, even like someone like Vivek Ramaswamy certainly did not. The emulating of Trump has never worked. It's not worked with anyone yet. And Ron DeSantis is the closest thing to it, and that's how he ran when he was running for governor of Florida, but it's not how he's governed. And so to me, it's pretty obvious that like trying to be Trump doesn't work. That's the reason that I don't know if it's forever changed, because Trump doesn't have, you're right, this has been policy people trying to shape some sort of policy that defines Trumpism, but really Trumpism is just defined by whatever Trump wants right then. And that's the reason it's been so hard for people to define it, is because you could say something one day and then get totally undermined by him the next. Because really, he doesn't have many principles. I'd say the only thing he's been consistent on for a really long time is he's really anti-free trade, which it seems like he's had that opinion since the 80s. Other than that,
you could say that in immigration, which they kind of work hand in hand.
Immigration, yes, and immigration too.
Pretty consistent.
Although I don't really think he has real policy even idea. I think he thinks the wall is the solution, and I don't really think he's thought beyond that. Honestly, I don't think he really thinks about like, should we offer more green cards? What kind of do we want more merit-based immigration instead of, familiar and who you know and stuff? Like none of that stuff interests him. He just wants to build a wall and solve it. And so in some ways I go, well, that can't last past him. If he died tomorrow, I'm not I don't think the Republican Party would stay the same for very long. Now, I do think that he has because the whole party has been taken over by these Trumpian people, and most of them tend to be more isolationist and be more nationalist. It's like they kind of hitched their wagon to him before any other conservatives did. And so I think that they have a louder voice inside, and that does concern me, because I think that's, I don't love that foreign policy of isolationism, and isolationism in economic terms too. I think those combined are dangerous for us and the world, because that's kind of where I'm at. I think that you can still not be in wars and have peace through strength. I still think that's something that's possible. But so I think it's interesting, because I think if Trump died tomorrow, I don't think that this stuff would last even under his VP, because I think JD Vance is, for the most part, being a chameleon to get power. I think that that's what he's been doing the whole time. The JD Vance that we heard from in 2016 and 2018 was different than the one that ran for Senate, which is different than the one that ran as his vice president. So I don't think we really know who JD Vance is, except that I know he's actually smart, and he probably does have a worldview that he's not really telling us potentially, or maybe he has. Maybe it's one of the versions of him we've seen. I would assume that's the case. So, if JD Vance, who is the sort of second savior for MAGA, if he came out and was like pro free trade all of a sudden, would everyone just follow along with him, or does that only work with Trump? I don't know. And I think it only works with Trump. I don't actually think it works with JD Vance. I don't think it works with anyone. I think there was a little bit of that with Barack Obama, with the Democrats. There was sort of this idol worship, but he didn't really take it to that degree, because he had some ideas that he actually, he had these principles that, I think that some of them were misguided and not wise for him to pursue. And I think we're kind of the downfall of him being able to get stuff done as president. But, he changed the party in ways, but not really in ways that only had to do with his personality, and Ronald Reagan's the same way. Ronald Reagan had this sort of, where I'm going to make this coalition of these different groups of people, and it's going to be a lasting coalition. And there was obviously it's a little easier in the Cold War when we've got a common enemy. I think that's one problem right now, is that we naturally want that as people and as citizens. And the problem is right now, instead of looking outward to that, at the people that are very obviously our enemies, we are making the Democrats those people. And that's what Donald Trump's language is. It's not that China's evil, or that Russia's evil, or that Iran's evil, or North Korea, or that these are really big problems that we're going to have to deal with. It's that Democrats are evil and immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. That's what concerns me, is like we're looking for the wrong enemy. And I'm not saying I agree with Democrats at all. I think Democrats have lost their way as much as Republicans have. I think this has been basically a battle of who can barely keep the ship together for a couple years, win an election, and then lose it. Democrats have a lot to learn from this election. I'm not sure they will or won't. But if they got their act together and became a legitimate party that ran away from the far left kind of politics, the woke stuff, the transgender stuff, the welfare for all kind of stuff, I think if they ran away from that, and actually tacked more to the right, Republicans would be in trouble, because if they actually got their stuff together, Republicans would, I think, in turn look like they don't have their stuff together, because most people can't answer what either party's platform is on a specific issue. Most people, there was very little daylight between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on some of this stuff. It was, let's all not tax tips, and let's not touch Social Security, and let's not do anything about the debt. And it's like they were on the same page on a lot of the issues. And I think it's because they were just looking at polling and running with that. I don't really think there's a lot of principles here. I think until the parties actually can list out what their real platform is and what they're really for, and actually speak to the things that people care about, because like people cared about inflation. I think it was more of a rejection of Biden and Harris than it was an embrace of Trump's policies, because if Trump does the tariff stuff, it's going to be way worse than anything Biden did for inflation, in my opinion. I could be wrong about that, but if you really implemented tariffs across the board, I think it would be bad for the U.S. economy and bad for the very people that voted for Trump. So I'm not sure it can last, but I do think that there has been at least a permanent enough change that I don't think it's going to turn around in 2028. I don't think we're all of a sudden going to have like a Reaganite party, or someone like I really don't think there's a future in the party right now, at least for the next 8 years, for people like Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis. I really think those people are done.
My dad grew up in suburban New York and New Jersey. And New Jersey had gotten away from us since the end of the Cold War. And there was a congressional district that flipped in northern New Jersey that nobody literally nobody saw coming. And it was open after the congressman died a few months ago. Long-serving Democrat congressman. This area flipped 20 points and was surprisingly the one of the largest swings of any district in the country, and it's now a Trump district by about 2 or 3 points after he had lost by 20 a couple or 4 years ago. This is right next to where my dad lived. It's a very Hispanic heavy area now, and also a decent amount of Arab migrants, as well as actually a lot of strong Jewish population. And
it was a bad combination for Democrats this year.
Yeah, no, clearly was in that particular area.
That's pretty bad.
This is the area around Passaic and Patterson in northern Jersey that's getting out into the semi-exurbs and suburbs, but had not had any indication that it was going to probably go this way. And even surprised the heck out of me, and I was expecting a pretty strong Hispanic turn. I bring that up, and you could also point to northern Queens, where Reagan did pretty well 40 years ago, but it had gotten away as it had become more Asian. And then that area also had a significant swing. A lot of conservative voters within the Democratic coalition that were there because of, I hate to say it, skin color, are now leaving. And some of that was slowly but surely naturally happening, but Trump awoke a lot of that, and I do not see a snapback coming on some of those issues. Yes, I do think that DeSantis and Abbott in particular helped to awaken a lot of the sentiments that were coming, and I don't know how the Democrats uncork that bottle in some of these areas where I expect, especially where Trump did well up ballot, but he wasn't able to quite get some of the gains sealed in down ballot. I expect there's going to be some significant gains probably by the end of the decade where Republicans are going to start running very competitively in areas they never did, even if Republicans occasionally won at the tip top of the ticket years ago. South Texas is a prime example. Heck, areas of Palm Beach County that hadn't been Republican since the 80s are now Republican now. And the 3 Jewish congressmen who represent that area in Congress are going to have to constantly look over their shoulders. They never were below 60% during the Obama years, and now they're below 55. And that's another example. Also, the Hispanic, some of the Hispanic districts around Orlando with the Puerto Rican vote, even despite the issue with the garbage island from the comedian at the rally in Madison Square. That's another example where votes are shifting. And even at the state legislative level, some gains are happening despite everybody's expectations, where people are coming in and securing that. There is now a groundswell in some of these areas where the party is changing and they're now emerging as competitive in a way that they weren't before. And Trump has unfurled that, and that will have some long-term ramifications for the party. And heck, black men are now a quarter of black men are now voting for Republicans. And from what I was seeing, it's well over 30% amongst young black men. And that
Trump did much better with the young voters than I think anyone thought he was going to do. Like I said, my question is, I'm not ready to call it a trend until I see midterms in 2026, just because I think that will tell us more. Because you're right. I mean, even in AOC's district, he did something like 15 points better than he did in 2020. In AOC's district, who's like certainly the most far left, one of the most far left Congress people in all of Congress.
Yeah, AOC was asking her voters, like, if you voted for Trump, please talk, call me because I want to talk to you.
Yeah, I think there's pretty good information that shows that a lot of this swing is, less informed voters. They're not people that are going to listen to a show like this. They're not people that really even pay attention to politics. They probably couldn't name 3 branches of the government most of the time. I think that it's very hard to, for example, those people aren't going to pay attention day to day, and they're not going to be watching Fox News or MSNBC or anything like that. For the, they vote, and then they really don't pay that much attention to politics. So what's going to affect them is like, are prices stabilized? Do they have good jobs? Does their money go further than they feel like it did under Biden and Harris? I think that's going to be the stick that measures that. I think that immigration is even a little abstract, because once we don't see video of people, millions of people just pouring over the border, I think it kind of goes away unless Abbott sends a bunch of people to your city and all of a sudden you're like inundated with some of these migrants that are on either visas or these temporary visas or this asylum wait for 7 to 10 years. I think that unless you're actually feeling that in your community, it's less likely to make a difference in your vote. I think New York felt that. I think Chicago felt that. I think that Ohio obviously has felt that. But some other states still haven't. I'm not sure that California is one of those places I go, I want to see the trend. I think for example, people kind of thought the Californication or Californification, however we'd say it, of like places like Texas and Florida. I mean, you had all sorts of people predicting that Ted Cruz would lose in Florida, which is just like, Democrats have wasted how many hundreds of millions of dollars trying to get...
To be fair, Ted Cruz did lose in Florida.
Sorry, Ted Cruz in Texas, but and Rick Scott in Florida. Sorry, I got a little confused. But you know what I mean? Like, this is one of those things where you go, Democrats have wasted hundreds of millions of dollars trying to flip those states. And it's very clear that the people that moved from California to Florida, Texas, places like that, did not vote the way they were voting in California. So I don't know if that means that most of the people that have exited California were leaning more conservative anyway. I think that stuff is interesting because obviously California's map looked more red when you compare it county to county. Trump won several counties in California. Now, he still lost by 5 million votes or something. It's not like he's going to win California, but it's at least interesting because, and also California voted down they voted for, what was it, Prop 37 that undid the Prop 48 stuff. Do I have those numbers right? Don't quote me on those numbers, but it was basically the soft on crime bill that passed several years ago. This was a thing that kind of tidied that up a little bit and took some of those, changed some of those crimes back to felonies and stuff. It's pretty clear that Californians have thought that the experiment in California of super progressivism has not gone that well. You're seeing San Francisco recalling school boards and DAs and things like that. You're seeing that in Portland or Oregon, where we had like the legalization of all drugs, and then 2 years later they dialed that back. So I think people are smart enough to see when policies fail, and then they're punishing people for enacting those bad policies. I think Trump's and Republicans have to do a really good job at the PR game, which I will give Trump this. He seems to be the only two qualifications to get in his cabinet are be loyal to me and look good on television. So, I mean, he could have a really good PR team, but like the things he got done in his first administration when it comes to like the deep state and sort of the bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff were like at the FCC, which got really no press. And it wasn't big and flashy, and it's boring. And that's really what government is. It's kind of boring, and that's what it should be. So my concern is that if they try to look for the big flashy stuff, it might also be the stuff that pisses off voters. But I do think people will vote with, oh, wait, like this is more efficient. If they can show them that they're saving money, if they can show that the bureaucracy is working better for them, if that affects people's lives in a positive way, I think you win. I just think that it's going to be hard. I think they're promising a lot, and that there's no better way to disappoint people than to make promises you can't follow through on. And I think people running for president specifically, but politicians in general, would be better off leveling with people and saying there are trade-offs, because there are trade-offs to everything, and being like, I think we need to go after this, but it could cause this kind of pain, or there's this trade. Like, I just think if politicians were more honest about what they could get done, Nikki Haley, great example during the primary of going like, guys, we can talk about abortion all we want, but until you get 60 votes in the Senate, you either need to win 60 seats in the Senate or you got to work with Democrats. And it's just not going to happen. You can't pass abortion laws, pro or against, without 60 votes in the Senate. That's how this works. I think that was a refreshingly honest way to level with people. And Trump tends to bloviate and be a little bit more like, oh, we can do everything on day one. It's going to be amazing. I'm hiring the best people. Only I can fix it. I think that's the worst thing he ever says, because it sets him up to get the blame for if something doesn't go right. Because if you're saying you are the solution to everything, to me, you're your own worst enemy, because you really don't have anyone else to blame it on at that point. Anyway, that's a long-winded way to say that.
So, yeah, and of course, to what degree and whether or not this is somewhat permanent within the Republican Party is also dependent on what the Democrats do.
Yes.
Do they moderate? Do they go a different direction? You know, I would say one of Donald Trump's superpowers is his ability to make the left go mad and just over respond in a lot of ways. I still recall, I pulled it up here, the video from We the Internet TV on YouTube. Stop making me defend Donald Trump. With just explanation. Meet Gary. He dislikes Donald Trump, but he also dislikes when people blatantly misrepresent Trump's words and actions. And the entire video is him basically saying, no, Trump didn't actually say that, or he doesn't actually do that. And he keeps, and he's being accused of being a Trump supporter. It's like, no, I don't support Trump. But the left can go a little loony. And the reason Blake, the way you're describing this of, you know, if the Democratic Party would stop embracing woke or distances, I shouldn't say stop embracing, because a lot of them don't embrace wokeism, but a lot of them have failed to distance themselves appropriately, say, from some of the more radical elements there. I think there are potentially two different ways. Oh, we might have lost Blake there for a little bit. I think there's potentially two different ways this could go on the Democratic side. One is that they do moderate. There we go.
Sorry, I had an internet problem. I don't know what it was.
No, it's okay. I'll just start over there for just a brief minute. I was going to say, I think the left, or maybe I should say the Democrats, could go two different directions. One simply being that they take your advice. They find a way to be more mainstream and to tamper down the more odious elements on their side. I don't think that's very likely. I think what could also happen is they get their own Donald Trump. They get their own populace who finds a way to speak kind of bloviated nonsense, but sounds very honest. And then we end up in this nightmare scenario, I say, where both the left and the right are competing with essentially demagogic factions. And Christopher, you might want to respond. Oh, there we go. Okay, Blake's back.
I don't know what's going on with all my stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think most of this, I think, does depend on how the Democrats respond. I think if they go, I think it's more likely, you're right, that they try to go, well, we need our own populist kind of person, that, and I think you just get more alike in those kind of situations. So I think it does kind of depend on how they respond, because if they learn their lesson, which I think was pretty obvious, that like it was a full-throated rejection of Democrats kind of across the board. I mean, like I said, they still won some Senate seats that Donald Trump won the states, but it's pretty obvious that people did not like the, you know, I hate to throw the woke word around, but that's just kind of the short for the transgender stuff. The everything's racist. I think it's pretty clear they were rejecting Kamala Harris's need to silo everyone into what their skin color and gender were. It's white men for Trump, and it's Latinos, or sorry, white men for Kamala, and it's Latinos for Kamala, and it's women for Kamala. And it's like she was literally segregating the crowds for these things. I don't think people want to be talked to like that. I think it's pretty clear. Like, you look at the Latino vote, and the black vote, and all these things that Trump got more of. I think people were going like, yeah, you know what? Inflation affected my wallet, not because of my skin color. Like, that's not like why it affected me. So stop talking to me as a black person or a Latino person or whatever. I think if Democrats could just learn that lesson, the like abandon the identity politics stuff, I think it would do them a lot of good. I think that we need two healthy parties, and we do not have them right now. I don't want Democrats to get their act together, because I think that I agree with them. I do on almost nothing, because they have lurched so far to the left on stuff over the last 15 years that I think they've lost voters. And I think that especially minority voters are going, yeah, you can tell me over and over again that I'm a fool and that I'm racist or sexist or whatever for voting for the other party, but what have you done for me ever? I think that's what they're saying now. Democrats could be the people that actually do that kind of stuff. And I think there's people like Senator Fetterman that I think are, kind of bright spots in the Democratic Party that have always called out the anti-Semitism and seem to really be willing to work with people, which is a very surprising turn of events. I did not think
Fetterman has really surprised me.
Very surprising. I mean, mostly, this is not trying to be mean. I just didn't think he could perform the job after that stroke he had. The fact that he couldn't communicate well and couldn't listen well, I just thought, you're not going to be able to do that job. It wasn't that I had any problem. Now, I also thought he was really progressive, but and I think that Republicans could have won that with a better candidate. But he's been very surprising, because he's kind of gone after the the silliest versions of the left, and he's suffered no consequence for it. He's very popular in Pennsylvania, and I don't think he's reading the tea leaves and then saying what he thinks is popular. I think he's just saying what he thinks is the obvious right thing to do and say. I don't agree with him on a lot of policy. Obviously, he's still really a progressive guy, but he's been refreshingly honest. My theory in politics since 2016 has been that people want authentic politicians. They don't even care if they don't like you very much if they think that you're authentic. I think Trump's authentic. I think he's authentically Trump. No one ever would accuse him of not being himself. Now, that doesn't mean he's not BSing a lot, and he's not full of it sometimes, but I think he's authentically Trump. I think people like Bernie Sanders for the same reason. I think people like John Fetterman for that reason. I think people are learning the wrong lessons. And I think what the Democrat Party will more likely learn is, oh, we didn't go all in on the progressivism, and that's what we should do. Even though it's really obvious that Kamala Harris's biggest liability was that she said those super progressive things and didn't have a good excuse for why she had changed her position. So like now they don't only not trust you, but it's like, well, which version is right? I really don't like the version from 2019 for sure. So my fear is that that's what Democrats will learn, because that's the lesson they learned in 2020 from 2016 was, oh, well, Bernie Sanders must have almost won because he was super all in on the democratic socialism stuff. I don't think that's why he did well in 2016. I think it's because people thought he was authentic and Hillary Clinton wasn't. So, and I think that's why they like Trump. And I think that the quicker Republican politicians learn the same thing, quit trying to be Trump, just be yourself. Not that you can't massage that a little bit, but I think it's pretty clear that like Ron DeSantis is a dork. He should just embrace it and quit trying to be something he's not. He's a policy and executive wonk, and that's good as a governor. Like, you should embrace that. I think it would behoove politicians to do that on both sides of the aisle. I'm not sure that's the lesson they're going to learn, though.
I would say, as far as Democrats learning, I actually think you're probably right on this. There is an element that might come in to try to reel them back, not unlike what happened when Clinton did everything with DLC back in the late 80s, early 90s after the loss of Dukakis. Although, ironically, a couple people from that wing have been speaking. You guys are aware probably of the Liberal Patriot Substack and John Halpin and Roy Teixeira, who did Emerging Democratic Majority back in 2002, and they basically had to distance themselves from it because progressives learned the absolute wrong lessons from Obama in how they thought they were eventually going to get the majority, and been proven wrong with this. And they think that, unfortunately, that the clerisy, the staffer, the blob that's on the that has overwhelmed the Democratic Party and all its allied constituencies on the ideological side will not let go. And Joe Klein, who also has a center-left Substack, outright said that he's leaving the party. He just came out with this like in the last couple of days, and he was part of the DLC crowd with Clinton. He's like, it, as much as I would like it to change and learn the right lesson, it won't, and it won't be with me at this point. They are not. He thinks they're constitutionally incapable, and I think that even if there's overreach by Trump in various ways, even if he has the door-to-door thing, and I think there needs to be some really aggressive immigration actions. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to go down. I'm not at that level, and it's not my issue space primarily. I think there's a limit to how far even the Republicans go down, even if they lose, because things have so retrenched. There are almost no rural Democrats anymore in Congress, especially outside of black rural enclaves like in Mississippi or North Carolina right now, or parts of Alabama and Georgia. They don't exist. The Republicans are now large outside of Miami, and especially not really that big in cities, although they made fairly good gains in cities and are at least competitive in a certain way again. Democrats have no rural base whatsoever, and they have they have some of suburban presence, but they're still mostly confined to cities, and they're starting to lose base in the cities. I don't think Republicans lose their rural constituency that they've gained over the last 15, 20 years, and especially the last three elections, I just don't see that retrenching at all back towards the
I think
dead.
you're right. I think you're
And
right.
so
I mean, yeah, rural is gone. It's gone.
That puts the McCain showed that the floor was about 45%. Then I think the floor for Republicans is at least, with a non-Trump guy, at least 47 and a half, maybe 48, because of where we're at. And obviously I think it can go higher. But even if we blow it, I don't see us being able to go much below that, barring an economic cataclysm. That can always change things, I grant. But outside of that dynamic, I don't see the retrenchment, because the Democrats, I think, are constitutionally unwilling and unable to make that change. And I'll give another example of something that I think will entrench for the Republicans' favor that Trump has done well with, and he was one of the few really big bright spots in the platform this year, and that's and that came out of COVID. And that's the mass expansion of school choice all across the country. Mm-hmm. And I think that especially with the victories that happened in Texas, yeah, there were some individual elections that happened. There were some individual statewide initiatives that went down on that, but in states that didn't have that, like Texas, I think there's going to be a big gain. I think there's going to be an expansion there. I think there's going to be an expansion in New Hampshire, where they where they had some gains. There's going to be an expansion in Georgia. I think there will be an establishment of some kind in Tennessee, and I think in some of these states that have been skittish, they will get off it, and that will be a further retrenchment, especially where the teachers' unions, as a prime example of them going nuts, will not be able to contain themselves with the loss of some of their power. And I think that, and as well as in some potential stuff with labor policy in other states, especially involving public sector unions, especially the teachers, and you're also seeing it in Florida now too, thank you, DeSantis, where they're going to lose their mind and they won't be able to move towards the center despite themselves, at least for 2026 and maybe even 2028. Yeah, they probably go the way of Trump, but I think that their constituency groups won't allow themselves to be able to have that populist posture that's successful like what a Bernie Sanders could do, because I don't think their authenticity will be able to work, or their authenticity will show their worst side of themselves in a way that doesn't resonate with the American people. Let me put it that way.
I'm less bullish on Republicans' chances going forward on like that these are like permanent changes for a couple of reasons. One, you mentioned people leaving Democratic Party. People are leaving both parties at like record numbers. There's more independents now than there are members of Republican or Democrats. So the reason I think that's bad for Republicans and really bad for Democrats at the same time, but I don't know who benefits more or is hurt more, is that the primaries are just going to get more extreme. So especially in like closed primary states like Oklahoma is, as more people come independents, that means fewer people like us potentially are voting in Republican primaries, which means you're just going to get fringier and fringier and fringier. And same thing with the Democrats. So if more people are becoming independents, the problem Democrats had in 2024 specifically is in most of those states, Democrats didn't show up. So independents showed up in the numbers that we would expect. Republicans showed up in numbers, especially like Trump did made gains in rural areas. He even made gains in urban areas, honestly. But it wasn't so much that he made gains. It was that like 6% of Democrats didn't show up. So if those people are motivated to show up, totally different game. Now, I think that we are destined for a long time until one of the parties does actually get their stuff together for these like 50-50 races. I think that we're not going to see, I don't think we're seeing someone with 40 seats in the House of a majority. I don't think we see either party get 65 seats in the Senate or anything like that. I think that there's just no chance of that happening until you get like real good leaders in the party that say, this is not working what we're doing. People are just voting us out of power and then voting Democrats out of power. And then they're voting us out of power. And this is not a way to build a lasting coalition. It's not a way to build power for the long run. It's not a way to actually get stuff done. You know, if you've got a 40-seat majority in the House, you can stand to lose a lot of Republicans and still pass stuff. When you got a 4-seat majority in the House, those are the 4 most powerful people in the country because they've got you by the balls, frankly. I think that and that's a problem when you've got the fringy elements of your party, be that the squad on the left or the House Freedom Caucus on the right, when they're the ones really whipping what's going on, because that's really what happens. You know, that's what's happened over the last couple of years with Republicans. Certainly what happened with Democrats too, where they were kind of holding their own president hostage with some of this stuff. That's dangerous. We won't get stuff done, and it will just invite voter backlash. I am not convinced that anyone that voted for Trump in 2024 that swung from 2020 won't swing back in 2026 or 2028. I do not think they're permanent. They could be, because I think Democrats could learn the wrong lessons and go further entrenched into the progressive stuff, which I think was very clearly rejected. I think that's why Biden's presidency didn't go well, is because he ran as one thing, said, I'm going to be a centrist Democrat. The adults are going to be back in charge. And then he blew it at every opportunity and listened to the most progressive parts of his staff and went all in on student loan forgiveness and the woke stuff. And people were clearly like, that's not what we wanted. That was not the mandate we gave you. It was don't be Trump. It wasn't be AOC. It wasn't be Bernie Sanders. I think Trump has the same kind of thing. I think that he could go all in on some stuff that people go, actually, these are the things we didn't like about you. Please don't do those things. Please just fix the things that we didn't like that Biden did. Fix those things. So I don't think that I would be, if I had to bet right now, I think that just because of the way history goes, I think it's very unlikely that Republicans have the House in 2026. They might continue to have the Senate because the Senate map is still pretty advantageous to them in 2026. But it wouldn't surprise me if they lost both, just like they did in 2018 and just like Democrats did in 2022, not to the degrees that people thought they would. But, you know, it's kind of one of those things where, well, I guess they didn't lose the Senate because Donald Trump didn't help that at all. But that's why I'm less bullish on the Republicans being an entrenched thing. I do think Republicans, to your point though, the smartest thing the Republican Party could do is focus on winning urban areas. They would be unstoppable if they went into these urban areas and said, look, Democrats have been in charge of this city for 50 years. Do you think it's better than it was 50 years ago? And I think that Republicans are foolish to go all in on only their rural thing. I think Republicans really have a lot of gain to make and a lot of great arguments to make in major urban areas where I think they could actually make some real gains. I think that would be much smarter than the sort of Democrat, let's turn Texas blue. I think Republicans would be much better going let's look at the cities in red states that we think we could go after. Let's go after Atlanta and these kind of places that are in these purplish areas that go hey, if Democrats really benefited you, let's talk about it. I think that'd be a wise move. And I think that would potentially change demographics of voting in this country for a long time. I'm just not sure that they'll learn that lesson.
So we're going a little long, but I wanted to squeeze one last question in, maybe to go around. And it's an unfair question because it's easily an hour-long conversation. I'm not going to hold you guys for another hour. But that is, and I think this conversation has been very interesting, but it has also been understandably focused on policy and focused on the political prospects of both parties moving forward. If we were to, say, refocus on the conservative movement as a whole, what does this portend for that? And Christopher, you were kind to share an article ahead of time written by Jack Fowler talking about, the unanswerable question, what would such and so say of this moment if such and so is no longer with us? And the such and so in this case was Bill Buckley. William F. Buckley, right? The founder of National Review, in a lot of ways, the founder of movement conservatism in modern American history. Not necessarily the intellectual oomph behind it that started with other gentlemen, but the individual who was able to find a way to fuse together not only a coalition, but essentially a movement that could elect people, right? And this gets grubbing down in dirt. And I've said this before, and listeners of Saving Elephants would certainly know that William F. Buckley is one of the 4 individuals in the Mount Rushmore of Saving Elephants conservatism. When I try to say this is kind of what I mean by conservatism, it's the other 3 incidentally are Edmund Burke, Russell Kirk, and Thomas Sowell. None of these are perfect individuals. And Buckley certainly wasn't perfect. He had his excesses. He had his extreme moments. He had his populist excesses, I would say, especially early Buckley. But it is fair to say even later in life, he befriended Rush Limbaugh. He was There were ways in which he leaned more heavily on the populist stream than maybe I would have. It's entirely possible if he's still with us, he would have sided with Donald Trump. So I guess I want to close in a sense, because if the Republican Party is headed by an individual who has the I alone can fix this mentality and does not at all seem interested in actually rolling back deficits in any meaningful sense, if we're actually staring at a Republican Party that is business friendly and maybe is right on the cultural issues and is right on immigration, but is wrong on trade and is especially wrong on the excesses of an ever-expanding federal state and has no interest in reining that in, is this the end of the conservative movement, or is it in the Republican Party, or what is the hope for conservatism going forward?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go.
Okay.
I 8 years ago, I would have been much more sanguine on that. But ironically, I'm at a place where, especially because one of your, I won't say heroes, Josh, but one of your people that you think is still has a place of esteem in your mind, and in certain ways even still mine, even though I disagree with him much more than I ever used to, Jonah Goldberg, says if there's one thing that's really good that comes out of this election is the breakdown of the racial cordons that had built up over the last 40, 50, 60 years. And that can be a template for going forward. I know Bush had a little bit of success with that in 2004, but we haven't had this level of success with the Black community going back to maybe 72, if not back to Eisenhower, especially amongst Black men. And the same thing with Hispanics. So the gatekeeping within racial communities has broken down. And I think that is a very good thing for allowing for prominence of conservatism to develop. Now, admittedly, in certain policy strands, there are some downsides that could potentially come, especially with trade. But I think a lot of that, as a negotiating tactic, I think can be overcome, depending especially on how aspects of the tax bill get negotiated going forward. And I think a lot of he's wanting it in a general way, and I think some of that could potentially have some downside, especially for inflation. I'm not going to say that it wouldn't, but I think a lot of it does come down to negotiating tactic employed to get Europeans to negotiate from a better way. We did it a little bit with Canada before, and I think there will be some sort of renegotiation of USMCA that'll prompt things, and I think immigration ties into some of that too. But I don't think that it's going to be a rejection, and especially at the state level, where we're actually having more success, especially in the states that we have consolidated power trifectas, where you have lowering tax rates, you have school choice getting implemented, you've had right to work implemented in most all these states, and potentially more to come, especially depending on how things go on the labor policy side. The one downside, I would get back to it. The one choice that he's had that I don't like is his choice of a labor secretary. And I think that might be one of the ones that gets in the crawl, because I've been seeing a lot of media that have been very good with him, specifically calling him out on that one. And I think that might come back to bite him in some way, is he's trying to overextend on that in a way that I don't think the base and various parts of the base and even parts of the establishment that have been willing to go along won't tolerate. Time will tell. But I think that there is any Republican politician we've had since Eisenhower who's gotten to the presidency, and in certain ways even more than Nixon, although Nixon was more generally moderate. I think that there's still plenty of room to be had for negotiation on various things. The only hard lines he has is that he's not going to be that open to being tolerating much of traditional neoconservative, especially in the Bill Kristol strain, neoconservative foreign policy. And I think that strain is probably going to be out for a good long while. But I think everything else is negotiable. And I think that there's still plenty of place for being able to deal with that, even on the fiscal side.
Yeah, I've meticulously avoided the international conversation because that's a whole other topic.
Oh,
We'll get that for another time. But Blake, what do you say to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's changed pretty drastically. I mean, like if you think about every conservative thing that you would have said 20 years ago, all the things that you would say with conservative, that's not the Republican Party anymore. We're essentially a pro-choice party now at the federal level. Let's just call it what it is. We're pro-tariffs. We're anti-free trade. We're isolationist. We are certainly not fiscally responsible, even pretending to be anymore. There's like, so I don't see any remnant left in the Republican Party right now of conservatism at the federal level. I see zero. There's not a single issue where I go, yeah, that's conservative. Now it might be more conservative than what the Democrats' policy is, and so therefore it's like it's the conservative position because it's more conservative than like whatever crazy thing Democrats want to do in that regard. But like I said, I don't see anything. Now, I think that can quickly change with a couple of things. I think that if you have a good communicator, the truth is Donald Trump is a very, very bad communicator of policy or ideas or even ideals or principles or things like that. That's not his thing. He's more of a sledgehammer. You get someone that, and really Kamala Harris was the same problem on the left, and Biden is to a degree too. It's like they cannot explain why people should be for the policy. Which is something that Ronald Reagan was good at. It's something that a lot of politicians have been good at, and we just haven't had one at the presidential level because I don't even think Barack Obama was very good at it. He was too elitist and kind of talked down to people, and he didn't really know how to explain why this was a good thing or something. You get someone like that in the Republican Party post-Trump, J.D. Vance could be that person because sometimes I think he does have the political talent to pull that off, but I don't trust I don't know who, like I said, who he is. But if someone like, who's the dream person or whatever, it's like, I don't see this happening. But if someone like Ben Sass all of a sudden is up there and is explaining why, like, this is bad for the federal government to do this and can actually explain like why this hurts people or why tariffs across the board you're going to end up paying for. Problem is no one's really doing that. Yeah, we have writers and stuff and National Reviews explaining it, but the voters are for the most part not reading something like that or paying attention to us and stuff like that. You really need a president or politicians that are high up in leadership that can explain why and also explain, like I said, I think the trade-offs. I think just being honest about those kind of things and admitting what they don't know and saying we think this is the best policy for this, including on the international stuff. I think that that's also the really likely scenario that like snaps the Republican Party out of the isolationism is, what if Russia attacks us? This is not outside the realm of possibility. We uncovered a plot that they were going to blow up a European airliner, a commercial airliner, the terrorist attack. These are not crazy scenarios to think that Iran or Russia, North Korea, China could do something really drastic over the next 4 years that might really make people, we were isolationist right up until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And then it was a total, the public turned on a dime on that essentially. That events can happen. I don't see without those events us like deterring from this sort of path we're going down. But I know that those kind of events will happen. Like we are in a situation where Donald Trump is going to have to deal with some really serious stuff. And I know that he just hopes it'll all go away by the time he's inaugurated. I think he just hopes that the Israel-Gaza stuff will be neatly tied up and that maybe Russia-Ukraine will be on their way to like,
I hope it all goes away by the time he's inaugurated also.
Yeah, but like I don't think it's permanently going to like just disappear. I think that it's very likely he's going to deal with like an international problem that people are going to like quickly judge, just like they did with Biden in his Afghanistan withdrawal. They're going to quickly say, that's a great example. The polls said people wanted to get out of Afghanistan. And then he pulls us out of Afghanistan. It looks like, helicopters leaving the roof of Saigon. And people are like, that's not what we wanted. And it was very clear that you can't look at the polls to see where people's sentiments are without the event actually happening. I think that you can theoretically say all sorts of stuff. But if we get attacked by Russia or there's another terrorist attack we've had several terrorist attacks foiled in the last couple of years that I think are crazy. I mean, including Iran trying to assassinate Donald Trump and other members of his administration. Something like that happens, and I think people are going to quickly go, ooh, being isolationist didn't work. We got attacked. I mean, obviously, if it's just an assassination, it's less impactful than like a terrorist attack that kills numerous Americans. But I think that our tune could change pretty quickly. I think we're a little complacent currently. And I do think that it could change really fast, but I'm not encouraged by the path we're currently going down for traditional conservatism of all those people you mentioned that are sort of the same thinkers that I pay attention to, and the to put the modern people is Jonah Goldberg's and the National Review crowd, and like those people are not. They're for the most part homeless too. Their ideas are not being listened to. So I think that can change quickly, but I think it would require, like I said, someone like Nikki Haley could maybe do it, but I don't think she has a future in the party. And so I think she had the talent to do so. I just don't think that I don't see a swing back in 2028 after Trump of just back to normal for the Republican Party. I don't think it's swinging, like I said, outside of a terrible outside events, which I obviously don't want to happen. I would never cheer for that to happen, but I do think it's the only way that changes it really for either party. I think that both parties are kind of dealing with these identity crises, and it's almost like they need an outside event to help them decide where to go. And 9/11 was probably the last sort of event like that. And then the 2008 financial crisis. I really think all the populism stems from the 2008 financial crisis. I think you just like everything goes back to that. Donald Trump is not the cause of this stuff. He's a symptom of what happened in 2008, 2010, 2012. And so I don't want to have a worldwide economic collapse again. I don't want to have a terrorist attack. I don't want to have a World War III. These are things I'd like to avoid. Unfortunately, I think they're the only things that could shake people out of their apathy, though.
It is unsurprising that the host of the Homeless Conservative doesn't currently find a home in the conservative
Weird,
party. Yeah, very weird. Blake, it's good to have you join us. Tell people how they can find your podcast.
It's on all the normal podcast stuff, YouTube, Spotify, Apple. You can also just go to thehomelessconservative.com, and there's lots of links to short content, long content, all that kind of stuff. Do it weekly. Try to release it on Wednesdays, although sometimes I don't get around till Thursdays, but try to do it on Wednesdays.
Awesome. And Christopher Chesney, always a pleasure talking to you both one-on-one and in these podcasts. Good to have you. I always enjoy your analytic mind on how our elections work. It really adds a lot of color to the conversation. So very good to have both of you gentlemen this evening. Good to have everyone out there watching. We will have to, maybe we'll do I know both of you were trying to sneak a little foreign policy in there on me at the end there. We'll have to have you or others back for that, because that's a whole other can of worms. But with that, thank you all for watching, and everyone have a good night.